Keir Starmer is in serious trouble, not just because of the debate about the fuel allowance, which is going to be a problem with various people talking about abstaining and even being encouraged to vote against the proposal. This one is about the David Lammy decision to trim the export licenses to Israel, the 30 export licenses which were stopped. And this could trigger serious legal action. The Labour government under Keir Starmer faces criticism from, for example, UK Lawyers for Israel regarding this export ban on arms or military equipment to Israel. The issue has legal, political and diplomatic dimensions involving both domestic and international law, as well as the UK's role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the legal contention centres around the regulations governing export controls. And UK Lawyers for Israel argue that export bans should not be based on political motivations or the intended use of exported goods. And this point stems from international trade laws which regulate exports to ensure they align with established guidelines, such as not contributing to human rights abuses, but not necessarily on subjective political grounds. The Export Control Act of 2002 in the UK allows the government to restrict exports, especially in cases where goods could be used for internal repression or human rights violations. And if the Labour government justifies its ban based on evidence of potential misuse, such as war crimes or attacks on civilians, this could be legally sound under UK law. However, UK Lawyers for Israel claims that the Labour government might be overstepping the mark by imposing the ban because of political opposition to the Israeli government's actions itself, rather than a clear legal violation of international law. And this could potentially lead to legal challenges under the WTO regulations and the trade agreements, which require countries not to place export bans arbitrarily or bans which are based on political disagreements. This legal challenge points to larger diplomatic concerns. Israel is one of UK's long-standing allies in the Middle East, and by imposing an export ban, this could weaken the UK's position in international diplomacy and diminish its global reach. Critics might argue that the UK, once a global power, is now seen as less reliable in international commitments, that its word cannot be trusted, further isolating itself in post-Brexit chaos. There's a sharp moral distinction to be made between supporting Israel's right to self-defense, which I do, by the way, and condemning actions that may constitute war crimes, which I do as well, particularly with regard to the conflict in Gaza. In the same way, there's a distinction to be made between supporting Israel's right to existence and questioning the current government. Again, I do. Israel's military actions, including the potential displacement of Gaza's civilian population and plans to prevent their return to their homes, or indeed to rebuild their homes, are seen as troubling, and this raises questions of collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. And while the export ban could be viewed as the Labour government taking a moral stance against alleged human rights abuses, critics point out that such actions risk alienating Jewish communities and pro-Israel supporters in the UK, as well as sustaining relations, as well as straining relations with the Israeli government. And one of the key concerns about the ongoing conflict is the long-term future of Gaza. And the planned restrictions on civilians returning to their homes, the delays in reconstruction until all the tunnels have been cleared, and the ongoing military presence in Gaza by Israel suggest a continued occupation, and that cannot be right. And this could further inflame tensions and deepen the humanitarian crisis. And Starmer's government will need to navigate these sensitive issues carefully, balancing human rights concerns with geopolitical realities. There is also the case which had been put out very clearly, that if Israel doesn't sort out its relationship with Palestine, then Israel may cease to exist. Israel is fighting for its life. But there are many ways to fight. And one of them is diplomatically, and it seems that Netanyahu is not using that diplomatic leverage. The event on the border of Jordan yesterday demonstrated very clearly that Jordan is not going to overreact in the same sort of way that Israel overreacted. I think it's an overreaction. I think the siege of Gaza was an overreaction by a pugilistic, belligerent prime minister, and a prime minister who is more concerned about his self-preservation than he is in establishing security in the state that he governs. If he was good about security, then the October the 7th atrocity would never have happened in the first place. That is his failing. But he has compounded that failing with the siege of Gaza, which is variously described as genocidal. The legal action being suggested by UK lawyers for Israel could force the Labour government to defend its policies in court, potentially leading to a judicial review of the export ban. And the challenge highlights the broader dilemmas facing governments that seek to balance moral responsibility in international conflicts with maintaining legal and diplomatic credibility. The UK's reputation, particularly under Starmer, could be shaped by how this issue unfolds, both in the courts and in public opinion. And it is ironic that the Starmer government, a government headed by a senior lawyer, should find itself in legal trouble in the first few months of its tenure. This situation represents a complex intersection of law, morality, and international relations, requiring nuanced and careful handling by the Labour government, requiring experience. And that is precisely the area that this government is lacking so far. It has to rely heavily on the civil servants, the civil service, which is in place to give good advice at this particular moment. Civil service advice, unfortunately, is often couched in balancing one thing against another, so that in fact it covers its back. This is a time when Keir Starmer must be looking for advice from somebody who's prepared to put their neck on the line and say, this is something you can legitimately do, and this, and this is the reason why.